Hi guys, so today's video is kind of a continuation of my last video, and that would be some single point of view science fiction and fantasy books. Last time I talked about some young adult single point of view books, and this time I'm going to be talking about some adult books. Jumping right into it, I'm going to start with one that is extremely popular, and I'd say a lot of people feel it's one of the best fantasy books of all time, and that would be Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I personally think this book is good. I think it's extremely well written and very beautifully written. I don't personally fall into the category of thinking it's like the best fantasy book ever, but if you are looking for a good single point of view adult fantasy read, this one will fulfill that for you. The story follows our main character Quoth, who is telling his life's story to a chronicler, and he tells him that he will tell him his entire life story in 3 days. And so the first book is the first day of him talking about his life, and then it's supposed to be a trilogy where the second book will be the second day, third book will be the third day. Because it's a story of his life, it's not a set, this is the bad guy, the antagonist, this is what we're gonna do to take him out, and let's see if we succeed. It's not like that whatsoever. It's kind of meandering, like life would be. And in this first book, there is a magic school setting for part of it, which a lot of people really, really love. Because the main character is the one telling his life story, he is considered a flawed narrator, right? Because everything's from his perspective, and that's something you have to take into consideration, where he might contradict himself at times, or he might possibly be over-exaggerating at times, but it's just something that kind of goes the territory of having somebody tell their own life's story. Next up is a book that's quite similar as far as the main plot of Name of the Wind, and that would be Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. I do have a few disclaimers about this book, one being that the first book is single point of view, but the next one is not. There's multiple perspectives, so keep that in mind. And then also, technically, there are a couple chapters in this book where we go to the present day, where it's actually from a different person's point of view. Similar to Name of the Wind, there's a chronicler, and this person is hearing about our main character Valen's life, and so when that happens, we're in that guy's head. But otherwise, the rest of the book is from Valen's perspective, and I'd say most would consider it single point of view. Just on the surface, when you hear about the plot of this book, it sounds really similar to Name of the Wind. It's about a young man whose name is Valen Alsorna, who is telling his life story to a chronicler, and he has this really dramatic reputation, so you get this level of intrigue right away about who is this person. I want to see how they became who they ended up becoming. And not only that, but a lot of the story takes place in a school setting. It's not a magic school setting, it's like an intense like boot camp for years type setting where they're training these young boys to become these really, really intense soldiers. But when you really get into it, they're not that similar. I know they sound almost exactly identical just from those things, but the main characters are not alike at all. Quoth from Name of the Wind is more artistic, and he's kind of naturally good at a lot of things. He doesn't always take into consideration the negative consequences of his actions. He just kind of goes for stuff, where Valen is constantly thinking about how his actions affect things. He's very quiet and reserved and takes action when he feels it's necessary. The writing styles themselves are also very, very different. The writing style in this book is much more direct, so even though it also has a somewhat meandering plot, I would say this one helps you feel more rooted in what's going on, because it's not up here with its poetic nature. It's very grounded and straightforward. I personally really connected more to this book than Name of the Wind, but I definitely think that if you are interested in either of these books, give them both a chance. I think I'm in the minority when it comes to not thinking Name of the Wind is the best thing ever, but I would recommend both books to you guys because they're both really well written and they have different wonderful things to offer. Switching now to a book that I don't have a hard copy on me because I'm currently on the hunt for a hardback edition of it, and I turned in my paperbacks for store credit, so I don't have it with me, but that would be the Red Rising trilogy by Pierce Brown. I do have to give a slight disclaimer in saying that the original Red Rising trilogy is all single point of view, but the new series that Pierce Brown is writing, which starts with Iron Gold, is not single point of view. There are multiple perspectives, but The original trilogy, which is one that I absolutely adore, is single point of view. As far as the plot, the Red Rising series is a science fiction trilogy, and it takes place in the very, very far future where people are living on different planets and the entire society is broken up into different colors, where golds are at the top, they're considered almost like nobility, and reds are near the bottom, they're part of the low colors, and they're almost like slaves. Our main character, Darrow, is a red, and his plan is to kind of infiltrate the golds and try to break down the color system, and it's a fantastic trilogy. It is not only single point of view, but it's first person perspective, and the writing style is very direct, it's very bleak, it's very in your face, and at times it's very raw. I know this sounds kind of cheesy, but the emotions, I always tell people, the first 55 pages of Red Rising are what really got me hooked, because it's very, very sad. They're very high stakes books. There's lots of plot twists, there's lots of twists and turns, backstabbing, intrigue, all of that good stuff, along with a decent amount of action. I'd say mostly in books 2 and 3, less action in the first book. And there's a good amount of emotional pull. The first one I think is mostly emotional pull. The second one hardly any, but then the third one is a good combination of action and emotional pull. Overall, I just love that original trilogy. I think it's so good, and it does fall under the single point of view category. Next up is a series that you guys have heard me talk about a butt ton of times, and that would be the Dresden Files books by Jim Butcher. These follow a wizard detective in our world. They're very light reads for the adult section. They're not overly dense is what I mean. I don't mean light like they're fluffy. They're not fluffy at all. A lot of the times he's solving murders, like really graphic, intense murders, and they're still, though, really funny. There's a lot of humor in these books. I've recommended this series for a number of reasons. I think it's a great series if you're first transitioning into the adult science fiction and fantasy section. I think overall they're just fun. It's like a good series, and I've only read a few of them, but Jim Butcher clearly is setting things up in the first few that are going to affect the books later on. And the main character is super amusing, super funny. I think all of the characters have their own pretty direct personality traits. Sometimes they drive me crazy, sometimes I think they're hilarious, or I think they're awesome. Also, if you happen to like mystery books, you're probably gonna like this too, because that's a lot of what propels the plot forward. There are fantastical elements, sometimes that's what propels the plot forward, but if you like mystery books, this is a good one as far as like mystery books in the fantasy section. And the last book that is single point of view in the adult fantasy science fiction section would be the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. I unfortunately have only read the first book in this series, but I really liked the first one. It is a relatively short read, which is nice because there's some really giant books in the adult fantasy section, but it's about this man named Lawrence in an altered history setting, so it's supposed to be the Napoleonic era, but with dragons. Lawrence happens to come in contact with this ship. He kind of intervenes and ends up finding this dragon egg on the ship, and it hatches, and it kind of immediately like bonds with Lawrence, and so now he has to become a handler, and he has to join this group of people that have dragons and that use their dragons to help them in the war efforts. So it's a really interesting premise, and I loved it. The relationship between Lawrence and his dragon Temeraire is fantastic because Lawrence is a soldier, he's very by the books, and Temeraire, excuse me, I always describe him as basically if you could combine like a little kid and a puppy. He's just so like, oh, he's so precious, but then he also is like a kid in that he's a baby, so he's always questioning things, and he always wants to be like a hero, and it's so cute. But also, there's some really emotional moments in this book. Like, there's a part that I found extremely sad, like really tragic. I wasn't expecting it. But there's also some battles, which is really cool. And like I said, the relationship between Lawrence and Temeraire is great. Anyway, that's it for 5 books that are not only in the adult fantasy and science fiction section, but happen to also be single point of view. If you have other books that you've read that you think are great single point of view books and you want to leave those down in the comment section down below, feel free. That way anybody else who's interested in finding more books than just the ones I mentioned can see your recommendations and try to check those out also. Let me know which of these books you guys have read, which ones you're interested in reading. But anyway, if you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos, and check out some more of my videos right over here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.